we have in our agenda the web request exercise. So I'd like everyone to open that up and make a copy for yourself. I'll do the same. What we'll see in this exercise are that there are a number of JSON data formatted related challenges, but we'll get to those next week. So let's skip those for now. Let's skip down to challenge number 4 and 5, related to CSV files. And so with these challenges, we'll be using a hosted version of the CSV file. We know from last week that we can always, like if we have a physical CSV file, we'll download that like onto our local computer. And then if we want to use that physical CSV file in Colab, we'll have to upload that file into the Colab file system. But we can also reference a CSV file that's been hosted. And so in these examples, we'll be referencing some CSV files that are hosted on the internet. And this is similar to some options that you have in your project. So let me make a copy so we could do some work, and then we'll work on these together. I'll share this with you. So this is our CSV processing, web requests exercise. In class, we'll focus just on the CSV challenges number 4 and 5. This will also be somewhat of a good transition into the work we do next week, as we return to this exercise to do the JSON challenges. So here's my in-class copy of this exercise, and we can feel free to focus on challenge 4 to get started. And this actually uses a product CSV file. So before we go trying to tackle this objective, which is to just loop through the products and print the name and ID of each one, let's take a look at this CSV file. We'll get a sense of the structure of it. So at this link is where we can actually access the file in its raw representation. And so this should be familiar. It's our list of products, but in CSV format. Cool. So we'll want to use this and fetch this data, and then maybe loop through all the products, count the number of products, and just do some basic processing stuff. Knowing what we know from last week about using the Pandas package to process CSV files, whether they're local or hosted, there's some kind of function that we'll need to use. Does anyone remember which function we need to use to process any CSV file? The data frame class constructor is what we will get back when we use the function I'm asking about. But you're right in noting that we could form our own data frame by passing data into that class constructor. So that's really close. And that's also a Pandas thing. Yes, exactly. The read CSV function that comes from Pandas. So I think there might be some hints about this. Yeah, in the message right above, it's like, hey, we can use the Pandas read CSV method. And whenever we're using a function provided by a third-party package, it never hurts to just consult the docs for that function. Pandas.read CSV. Okay, what are the parameters? Oh, we remember the first parameter, I guess, is either a path or a local file name, like in quotes, products.csv, if that file is near our Colab notebook. Or it turns out that we could pass a URL here as well, and that works if our file is hosted. So knowing we need to use this read CSV function and knowing the kind of parameters that it takes, now I'd like for us to continue here. How could we get that data frame object of the data stored here in this CSV hosted URL.
We have to import pandas first.
Yes, yes. A recommended preferred strategy for doing that, or
I just did import pandas,
sounds good.
you know,
Okay,
and then pandas dot read underscore CSV, and then the name of the variable.
yeah, here's this URL that has our hosted data. So this read CSV method can read local files, in which case we would say like products.csv, but it would have to exist in the Colab file system. But we can also process hosted files. So now we are reading this data. If it goes. We remember that there's many styles of how to import a package. We can import the whole package, in which case, if we do that, then we'll need to prefix the function name with where it's coming from. In this case, the pandas package. I'd love for this cell to finish. All right, great. And now we see that data. Awesome. We know that we could also say from pandas import read CSV, and if we do that, we can just invoke that read CSV directly without the need to prefix pandas.read CSV. So there's just multiple options. We could say import the whole package and then use a function from the package, or we could say like from pandas import read CSV and just use the read CSV function. And when we use this function, we see that we get back this like spreadsheet style, the CSV style object, which we heard earlier was the data frame. And so now is when we can store this return value back in some other variable for later use. We can start with like results if we want, but from what we know so far, we know that the resulting object that gets returned from this function is a pandas data frame. So sometimes I like to just name that variable like df, or in this case, maybe like products df. It doesn't matter. You can choose your own variable name. And then we'll remember that when we ask, well, what data type is this thing? That it is a pandas data frame object, which we started working with a little bit last week. All right, so that's half the battle. Is like, how do we process this data and get it into Python in a variable that we could start working with? But now we also have some practical challenges here to answer. Our challenge here, I guess, is to loop through each product and print its name and ID. Okay, so if this were a list, we know how to loop through that, right? And if this were a list of dictionaries, our job would be really easy right now because we already know how to loop through a list of dictionaries and like print the ID and price attributes of each dictionary. So that's the first strategy that I'd like to share with you. And I'm calling it get in, get out. It's like, look, we got in, we used pandas just to read the CSV file, get a data frame, and that's it. Now let's get out and get back to some kind of list of dictionaries. The get in, get out approach will leverage this weird method that will convert our data frame to a list of dictionaries, and now we'll know how to work with it and do all the stuff we already know how to do. So option A is get in, get out. Before I share this, we'll just share, I guess, this with you in Slack. So we have our data frame, but how the heck do we work with it? There's so many things to do with data frames. We haven't really learned all of them. So why don't we just get out? And what we'll do here, we have our products df. We can invoke .toDict with a parameter of records. And this is just some boilerplate function. Maybe store the result in a variable called products. And then we can ask, well, print, what data type is our products variable? And we'll see it's a list. Okay, so what data type is the first item in this list? And maybe print, well, what is the first item in this list? We see the first item is a dictionary. So what does it look like? All right, cool. So what we've done here is we've, in one line, we said, all right, we have a data frame. We don't really know how to work with it. There's a learning curve. Why don't we just get out? Let's get out of this pandas world. Let's convert it to a list of dictionaries. So this toDict function is like saying, hey, we want to convert our data frame to some other type data structure. And it's this records parameter that says we want the list of dictionaries format. So this records parameter doesn't have anything to do with like which file we're using, any column names in it. It's just some boilerplate code. So if you want to convert any data frame to a list of dictionary, just invoke this toDict with a format of records, and you'll get a list of dictionaries back. All right, great, because we already know how to work with a list of dictionaries. We know how to loop through a list. So now that we have this products variable as a list of dictionaries, how can we loop through each one and print like the name and price of each one? Yeah. Yeah. Whatever attributes about each dictionary we can print out. Cool. We know how to work with lists and dictionaries. That was covered before the midterm, and we are comfortable with that. So if you ever have a data set that is CSV file, if you don't want to need to learn a bunch of pandas, which could be powerful, could be very efficient computationally to use pandas, but we don't have to. We don't need to learn pandas. It has a little bit of a learning curve to it. Let's just get in, get out. Now we have our data in a format that we know how to work with. List of dictionaries. I just want to pause, see if there's any questions. Get in, get out. That's option one. For the get in, get out option, we don't need to know any other things about data frames, or we saw the other week that when we reference a specific column in the data frame, we're working with another data type called the series, which is also from Pandas. So we'll have to learn how to work with that series. There's a learning curve. So why don't we get in, get out? And that's all good. And that's an option for you. Otherwise, we could always learn some ways of using pandas. And so in my Pandas package overview notebook, you'll see a lot of tips and tricks about how to work with pandas, including this one, how we could loop through a data frame. So this would be option B, use pandas. So you wouldn't know this, we're doing it for the first time, but if we want to work with that products df, that data frame variable, if we want to loop through the rows, we need to use some kind of weird dot iter rows. And then say for, I think it's like I comma row in products data frame iter rows. Let's see, print I. It might be an like a counter, an index, and then print the row. Let's see if I remember this right. Whoa. Let's just print I first. Okay. So here we're using what's called a destructuring approach. I guess when we need to loop the rows on a data frame, we have to actually use this weird dot iter rows method, which is a pandas data frame thing. And instead of just saying for product in this thing, we actually have certain rows. And so each row, what data type is that thing? Print what data type is our row. It will be a pandas series. So a given column in a data frame is a series data type. We saw in the past when we were working on that gradebook example, how we can use the supercharged capabilities of a series, like ask for its own max or min, and that's applicable when the series represents a column of values. but the series also represents a row of values, and we could reference it in a similar way that we do a dictionary. So we can maybe print row ID and the row like name. So we're referencing now each row like a dictionary, but we had to use this weird iter rows method of the data frame, and we had to use a destructuring approach because iter rows gives us not only the row in question, but also some kind of like index related to that row. So I'll share this in Slack as well. And this would be an option that requires us to know a little bit more of pandas, and there's a lot of pandas to learn. So if you would like to learn pandas and do more data science stuff, there will be more learning for you to do, but we're just kind of we're scratching the surface here. So in this web request exercise, there's another challenge related to processing CSV data. Let's do this one together real quick. One more quick example to help us work with Pandas data frames. Let's try challenge number 5, where we are gonna try to get this data related to stock prices. Maybe we'll take a look at the URL first and see what this data looks like. Okay, so it looks like CSV files still, comma separated values, row per record. First row is the headers or the column names. Okay, great. So in this data set, we could assume that there are certain columns here related to stock prices. All right, so in this challenge, we just want to print the latest closing price. So that seems like a simple challenge. So I guess we want like the first row, and then one of these is like the close or maybe the adjusted close. So we'll try to like pick out one of these values. And we could do this using the get in, get out approach or the full pandas approach, and we'll do both. So before we try to like pick out the latest closing price from this data, we're just gonna have to read this file first and get a data frame back. So I love a volunteer. How could we read the data at this URL? It's CSV formatted. We just took a look at it. Yeah, so we could just use that same read CSV function as before. And this time I'll just say from pandas import the read CSV function, which will allow us to use it directly, like read CSV. What could we pass in here to the read CSV function? Yeah, here we have this variable. We could read that URL, but it would be the same thing as if we just pass that string in there. And then that's it. And we know what data type do we get back whenever we use the read CSV function. Data frame, exactly. So we'll store this maybe in a variable called like prices df or something like that. Stocks df maybe. And then we could just kind of take a look at that. What does it look like? What are the rows? What are the columns? We can get a visual sense now of the rows and columns. Cool. So we've read this data, great. We have our stocks df variable, which represents our data frame. Quick recap. Here, visually, we see that the columns are like timestamp, open, high, etc. How do we ask in Python when we have this data frame variable, stocks df in this case? What are the columns of that variable of this data frame? Does anyone remember? What are the columns of the data frame? How can we ask that? What's the code we could use to start working with this data frame data type a little bit? Columns, right. It has a property on it called columns. So stocks df Again, this is a data frame and it has a dot columns property. Cool. Now we see explicitly what the columns are. Same thing goes with the rows, kind of. How can we count the number of rows? Does anyone remember? Yeah, pass this data frame into the len function. Cool. And that will help us count the number of rows. In this case, I guess there's 100. Okay, great. So, okay, we have this data and that's all good. If we want to get in, get out, I guess our goal here is to just print the latest adjusted closing price. So let's do this goal in two different ways. First, we'll just get in, get out. So if we want to convert this stocks data frame to a list of dictionaries, I guess then we could just take the first item in the list, which will be a dictionary, and it will have some kind of adjusted close key. And then we could just reference that data for that dictionary's key. So let's get in, get out. To get the latest adjusted closing price. I love a volunteer. How could we convert this data frame to a list of dictionaries and access the latest closing price? Yeah, like prices variable or stocks or something. Sure. Sure. Perfect. Yeah, this is what we'll need to do whenever we want to convert any data frame to a list of dictionaries. Okay, now we're storing the result in a variable and you're calling it prices. Cool. And so we know that this will be a list of dictionaries, but we could always like print out, well, what data type is this? But we just did that a few minutes ago. So, all right, now we have this list of dictionaries. The first item in this list will be the latest day. So how can we just get the first item here? Let's take this in steps, like the latest day. Yeah, like the latest day is like prices 0. Let's see what that looks like. That'll be our dictionary. And here we see the keys of each dictionary kind of are the same thing as those columns. And so we have all these attributes, timestamp, open, high, low, close. It's the adjusted close that we want. And so now, because this is a dictionary, we'll just reference that attribute we care about, like print the prices 0, latest or adjusted close. I'm using chained accessors here, but you could take this in steps. You could say first day is price is 0, and then latest close is like first day adjusted close. Cool. Awesome. Thanks. So that's the Pandas way. Oh, sorry, that's the get in, get out way, which you could always be comfortable with doing. But now I'll share with you just a little bit more Pandas where we might be able to use some Pandas here. So option B would be something like, let's see, we have our stocks DF. We could do this two ways. We could say, hey, let's get the first row and then take the adjusted close of that. Or what we could do is say, hey, let's take the adjusted close column and take the first value of that. So Pandas approach, like one, is like this. We can say, in order to get the first row, it would be nice if we were just able to like use this like a list, like square brackets 0. That would be helpful. But the data frame doesn't exactly work like that. Instead, we have to say the data frame in question .iloc, like give us the record at index location, blah, blah, blah. And in this case, 0 is the first. So it's very much like accessing a given item in a list, by its numeric index position that starts with 0. But with a data frame, we have to use this weird iLook method, which gives us our series data type, which has a adjusted close. So that's one way of arriving at the adjusted close. But there's another way. We could take a more that would be like a row-centered approach. Row-centric. Like take the first row and then ask for its adjusted closing price. But we could take a column-centric approach for this particular question alternatively. We can say, hey, stocks DF, let's get that whole column of adjusted close. Now, instead of dealing with the first row, we're dealing with a given column. And so now this is list like, I think we might just be able to say 0. Let's see, we might have to do something else here. Okay, yeah, that worked. So here's like a column-centric approach. And this is me just teaching you a little bit of pandas, but not too much. Because more pandas is kind of more data science class related. But if you're having fun, that's great. And if you learn pandas, it's a great skill to put on your resume, and it signals that you are interested in data science, you're a data pro, and working with data in Python. So it might be a good goal. Okay, so that's it in terms of the pandas that I wanted to show you. We just practice a few different options whenever we have a CSV file, whether it's a physical file that we get to upload and download somewhere, or whether that file is hosted on the internet at some URL. We can use the read CSV function from Pandas to read that data and give us a Pandas data frame data type, which then we could use two options to start processing. If we don't want to get into Pandas, we can just use the get in, get out approach, immediately convert that data frame, that weird data frame data type, to a list of dictionaries, which we already know how to work with. Or we can learn a little bit more about Pandas, start leveraging some of its supercharged capabilities. And I shared some of those with you today. You could just kind of take them as some FYI. A lot of this is also in that Pandas package overview notebook.